Yeah, so welcome this evening, and especially if this is the first time that you've ever been to a Tuesday night class, a really warm welcome, because there's some faces that I know from the last Wednesday class. It's their first evening this evening, so yeah, a really warm welcome to you all. So yeah, last week we started a theme, a new theme. Actually, just a little bit slightly lower, just because it's that's better. Thank you. A bit off-putting where I can hear my voice. Don't like it. Hopefully you like it. So last week we started a new theme, and it's called Transforming Self and World. And that was introduced by Bodhinaga last week. And some of the themes that we looked at is kind of how, these are intertwined. Transforming ourselves and transforming the world around us are inseparable, they're intertwined. So often people are drawn to come to a Buddhist class to kind of to transform themselves, to kind of maybe to become less stressed, to have more peace of mind. And then we were talking last week in the group from the last class that what people begin to discover is actually to get peace of mind you need to work on your ethical relationships with other people, and that starts to become more important. Working on your ethics and transforming your relationships in the world gives you peace of mind. Buddhism is about transforming our inner states of mind, but also we can't do that without the support of like-minded people, without building a community, being part of a community. So we need supportive conditions, we need like-minded people to be able to transform ourselves. So we need, the two intertwined. And then also Bodhinaga was looking at, there's a real altruistic dimension to Buddhism about compassion and generosity and helping other people. But if we can end up being what Sangha has called a cosmic social worker, basically trying to do good and fix the world's problems. But if we're not really working on our own states, our own inner states, we can just get burnt out and become more, in a sense, we can just become part of the mess rather than part of the solution. And if we're not really working on our own states of greed and hatred and ill will, then we'll end up probably doing more harm than good, trying to help the world. So if we want to transform the world, we need to work on our own inner states. And if we want to work on our own states and get peace of mind, we need to transform the world around us and create a community of like-minded people. So we saw last week that there's a dynamic between self and world, that the two are intertwined really. And it should come as no surprise, because one of the key Buddhist teachings that we hear about on the beginner's course is about that, the fact that everything is interconnected, interrelated, interdependent. We're part of this web of conditions, and everything that we can think of is part of this web of conditions which are interconnected, interdependent, interrelated. So if you want to change our inner states, that it's intertwined with the world around us, transforming the world around us. So this evening and next week as well, we're going to be looking in particular at this theme through in relation to the Buddha, the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, which I'm really excited about because I'm finding myself particularly inspired by and drawn to the historical Buddha at the moment. So I'm just looking forward to exploring that this evening. So you could say the Buddha is the ultimate role model or example for Buddhists of the transformation of self. The Buddha represents the complete transformation of self. So the Buddha in the state of enlightenment is completely free from the inner poison drives, from the inner states of hatred and greed, delusion, completely free of those. And he's also, so he's completely transformed himself. His own perspective on the world is completely transformed into a state of wisdom where he sees things very, very differently. And a real freedom from any inner limitations, any restrictions. So there's this very, very potent, very, very attractive state of enlightenment. And the Buddha represents that, the complete, ultimate transformation of the self. This was expressed, the Buddha expressed his inner transformation as love. It was expressed as love for the world around him, the people around him, compassion for the people around him, generosity, friendliness, patience. So the Buddha, having been transformed himself, was deeply connected to the world around him, the people around him. His enlightenment was expressed in terms of the world, in terms of other people, in relation to other people. And the Buddha sought to share his understanding, to share his the teachings, share the lessons that he'd learned, the benefits, to share the fruits of that with other people. So the first thing he set out to do after enlightenment was to find other people to communicate the teachings to share them with, so he could build community. And we're going to hear two stories over the next 2 weeks of some of those early encounters and early encounters of the Buddha and people, and him teaching them for the first time. So next week, Satyajyoti is going to tell us about the story of a young man called Yasa and his group of friends. And this is an example where the Buddha, this group of people have changed, their world has changed, they're taken out of their usual conditions into a different set of conditions, and they are completely changed as a result of that. So you could see this theme as focusing on two different aspects: transforming the world and transforming the self. So next week it will be a story where a group of people's world is completely changed by the Buddha, and then they are transformed by that. And then this evening I'm going to be focusing more on the transformation of self, an encounter of the Buddha with another community of people where it's going to be transformation of self that I'm focusing on this evening. So we are heading back in time, over 2,500 years ago to ancient India, the north of India. So the Buddha is very, very fresh from his enlightenment experience. It's just a few months after his enlightenment experience. And he's seeking to share what he's gained, share what he's learned with other people, to interact with people and find people who might want to learn about the teachings that he's discovered. And at this point where I'm going to pick up the story, he's got a community of 62 followers, 62 disciples, and he's just sent them off packing to share the Dharma, to share the teachings for the benefit of gods and men, for the welfare of the world. So the Buddha has got a community of disciples, enlightened disciples, 62, 64, I think, something like that. And he continues on foot through the forest. He has another encounter with a group of young men, which I'm not going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the next encounter. So the Buddha is walking along on foot, and what he does, he heads to a community of religious people who are practicing on the banks of a river, and they're called matted hair ascetics. So what I'm picturing is basically dreadlocked yogis, kind of spiritual people in India. And there's 3 communities all closely knit together, and they altogether they total about 1,200 people, 1,200 probably scruffy, smelly people with dreadlocks. Maybe I'm making some assumptions there. I shouldn't. But they're practicing in India. It's hot. They probably, they're focused. Well, another thing about this is they were fire worshippers. So they basically, it was very hot already, and they sat and practiced around very hot fires. So they would have smelled, I think. That's not relevant to the story. So forget about that. But they were fire worshippers, and the Buddha basically went to the leader. The leader was called Kassapa of Uruvela. The river was called the Uruvela River. And so the Buddha went straight to the leader of this community and said, "Kassapa, let me stay one night in your fire chamber." And Kassapa said, "Well, I'd be very happy to let you stay in the fire chamber, but I wouldn't recommend it because there is a fire-breathing serpent, a Naga, in the fire chamber, and you'll be destroyed, basically. You'll be destroyed if you spend the night there, so I wouldn't recommend it." And the Buddha just repeated his request a second time. "Kassapa, let me stay one night in your fire chamber." And Kassapa said, "Well, same answer, basically. You're very welcome to, but I wouldn't recommend it. There's a highly venomous, fierce and ferocious serpent Naga, and it'll destroy you, fire-breathing Naga. Don't go in the fire chamber." And the Buddha repeated his request a third time. And in the traditional stories, if the Buddha asked for something 3 times, it happened, basically. If he asked it a third time, it happened. So, the Buddha repeated his request. "Kassapa, let me stay in the fire chamber." And Kassapa said, "Okay, if you want to, you can stay in the fire chamber for the night. So so Kassapa came in, he went into the fire chamber, and I'm imagining a room probably the size of our red shrine room downstairs, something like that. And the room was filled by this ferocious, fire-breathing Naga, this ferocious serpent. And the Sutta says the Buddha did was simply made himself a seat out of some grass, sat down in meditation. I just he established mindfulness, he said. So the Buddha started to do the mindfulness of breathing in this fire chamber. And the Naga got angry with the Buddha. He wasn't happy about this. So the Naga produced smoke and filled the whole fire chamber with smoke. And then the Buddha thought to himself, well, maybe I could produce smoke without harming the Naga. So that's what the Buddha did. The Buddha produced smoke and filled the fire chamber with smoke. And at this point, the Naga got really angry and decided to produce flames. So the Naga filled the fire chamber with flames. And the Buddha thought, well, maybe I could produce flames without harming the Naga. So the Buddha responded by filling the fire chamber with flames. And by which point a big crowd had gathered outside the fire chamber of these smelly guys with dreadlocks. And they were watching what was going on inside and saying, oh no, he was so handsome, the monk who is so handsome is going to be destroyed. And basically this went on throughout the night. All through the night there were these flames inside the fire chamber. And then right at the end of the night, the Buddha opened the door of the fire chamber and brought out his begging bowl, and the Naga was curled up inside the begging bowl. And the Buddha said, here you are, Kassapa, here is your Naga, I have tamed his fire with fire. Strange story, a strange encounter, which I love. It's one of my favourite stories of the Buddha, one of my favourite sutras of the early stories of the historical Buddha. And what are we to make of it? What should we make of this quite strange story? Should we take it literally? Should we literally take it that the Buddha entered a fire chamber with a fire-breathing Naga? A few years ago, I was fortunate enough to have a kind of a small meeting really with Sangha Night, who is the founder of our tradition. And I asked him about this sutta because I'm really inspired or interested by this sutta. The idea of Nagas really excites me. And I said to him, what to make of this sutta, and he said, well, it's important not to dismiss it with our kind of cynical mind, say, oh well, it's probably just that there was a bit of a fire in the hut and it looked like there might have been a dragon or something, and to kind of almost like dismiss it with our rational mind. And I think what we need to do with stories like this, when there's quite mythic stories in the Buddhist tradition, is to engage with them imaginatively, to try and think, well, what might these stories be trying to evoke, what they're trying to communicate about Buddhist practice. And for me, well, if you're trying to communicate an inner experience, it's very, very difficult to put into words. It's very difficult to describe an internal experience with other people. Any kind of words you choose really just don't do justice to maybe, if you had a particular experience in meditation or outside of meditation, it's just very difficult to try and capture it with words. So sometimes, stories like this can do more to evoke an inner experience. And for me, this is what the sutta is describing, is an inner experience of transformation, where the Buddha enables Kassapa to be transformed. And so that's how I am going to approach this sutta. I'm going to kind of approach it and try and interpret it in that way, kind of in an imaginative way, and seeing what it evokes for me about the experience of self-transformation. So first of all, starting with the fire worshippers, the dreadlocked fire worshippers. And this is like a small detail, but I find it interesting that they're people who are engaged with religious practice, but probably not with self-transformation. It's this idea, if you rely on something like worshipping fire for your salvation, to rescue you, it's, in a sense, it's the way in which religion sometimes can turn into a reliance on rites and rituals. Really, we look for doing a particular prayer or a particular ritual in a particular way to save us, and it's unlikely that worshipping fire is going to transform us, to transform us. So it's almost like for me, they represent a group of people who are avoiding really self-transformation and the kind of the real spiritual work of engaging with themselves, transforming themselves. So that's the small detail, but that's kind of where the context for this story. And so what could be evoked, what could be symbolised by this fire chamber that the Buddha wants to enter, that the Buddha wishes to enter, and which Kassapa is locked and won't let the Buddha go into. And when I think of the fire chamber, what gets evoked for me is, the element of fire is very closely associated with transformation and also with emotional experiences. So we think of the chamber of the heart, the chamber of fiery emotions. And for me, that's what this evokes. This is what this evokes for me, the fire chamber, which is locked. So sometimes we can have very strong emotional experiences. We can have fiery emotions, and they can be maybe a bit too strong, a bit too overwhelming, a bit too powerful, and we don't want to go near them. We don't want to have those experiences. So we close the door of the fire chamber. We don't want to engage. We don't want to experience those emotions. And also, we can be conditioned not to want to experience strong emotions. So I don't know what it was like for you, but for me, growing up in Yorkshire with a northern father, I was told, don't go into the fire chamber, son. Men don't have emotions. That was what I was conditioned to, that's how I was brought up, not to experience emotion. As a man, a northern man, I mustn't experience emotion. Apart from a football match, that's okay. Football match is okay. Any other circumstances, don't experience emotions. And also there can be certain emotions that society says we're not supposed to have. Certain experiences, certain thoughts, certain desires that are taboo, really, or that are kind of we're not supposed to experience. So what happens when we do experience them? We can become frightened of them, we become scared of them. In a sense, we just don't want to go near them. So a bit like last week we heard about Lord Lambton and his queer fish that he hoyed down the well. Basically we can just try and forget about those experiences, forget about those bits of us, forget about those unpleasant emotions that we'd rather not have. And we just lock the door of the fire chamber. We have a kind of no entry sign on the fire chamber. And in a sense, we can kind of manage with like that, we can kind of go through life not really having strong emotional experiences, try and kind of, build your life to not have strong emotional experiences. But if you do that, there's going to be certain side effects, there's going to be certain consequences. So one of them, let me find the right page. Basically one of the experiences, one of the side effects of not engaging with our emotions would be, in a sense, what we call what we call alienated, kind of separated from our emotional experiences. So we are not emotionally engaged. And I was very much like this when I first came, because of my conditioning was a contributing factor. But when I first came to the Buddhist Centre, I wasn't very emotionally engaged. And so what I thought the metta bhavana was just smiling at people. I thought being friendly was what metta was. So I just go around the Buddhist Centre smiling at everybody, thinking, well, that's metta. That's what metta is. And also, when you're not connecting with your emotions, you can't really be wholehearted about things. You can't be passionate about things. You can't really get behind things wholeheartedly. And in a sense, I was like that as well. And you also you're out of touch with what you really think, what you really value, what you really believe, because those things, those kind of treasures are bound up with our emotions. So if our emotions are kind of a no-go area, then we're kind of out of touch with a kind of deeper sense of wisdom, almost, what we value, what's important, what we want to do in our life. So that's one of the consequences. We become cut off from from our emotions. But also the parts of us that we are pushing away, that we're avoiding, they take on a bit more of a scary form. We become scared of them, we become frightened of them. We know at the back of our mind, there's something we're avoiding, there's something we're not engaging with. And it can seem from the shadows of our mind scarier, bigger, scarier, more frightening than it is. It kind of grows into something scary. So in the story last week we heard about Lord Lambton's fish that grew into a big monster. And I think in the same way, I could see Kassapa's fire-breathing Naga locked in the fire chamber as evoking this sense. You create, if you don't engage with your emotions, there's going to be a reaction. There's going to be a response. What can happen is your emotions can leak out. If you're not in control of your emotions, they can leak out. In a sense, they can be in control of you. Either you're going to explode in certain situations, you're going to have emotional outbursts, or you're going to spend your life avoiding emotional experiences. In a way, your emotions are still controlling you. They're controlling how you live, what you do, the choices you make. And at some point, they're going to let you know about it. Your emotions will demand that you engage with them. And Sangha Night, in a talk called The Religion of Art, there's this little phrase that I really like, and he said, well, he likens your emotions to being like Cinderella. And he says, if Cinderella doesn't get invited to the ball, she's not going to stay at home politely doing the dishes. More likely she will burn the house down. And he's talking about our emotions. If we don't engage with our emotions, they're not going to kind of just wait for us to engage with us in the future. They're going to become destructive. The emotions will become destructive and cause problems. So, and particularly when you start to meditate, and we talked a little bit about this last week in the group I was in. When you start to meditate, you can start to become more aware of the drives, the kind of emotions, the experiences that we up until now have been unaware of. We've been kind of choosing not to be aware of. But when you start to meditate, you can't help it. You become more aware of different aspects of yourself, and that's highly positive. That's a really positive thing to happen on the spiritual path. But at the same time, it can be quite scary and quite uncomfortable. It can feel almost like we might have taken a step backwards because we're noticing more and more kind of different unskillful habits, emotions about ourselves. So when you start to meditate, you can't avoid your emotions. Your emotions are well, you can try to, but you need to engage with your emotions. So how do we respond to that? What do we do? Do we keep the door locked? Or do we try and slay the dragon, which is what we heard about with the myth of Lord Lambton last week, kind of cutting the dragon in half. And a lot of Christian legends like St. George and the dragon, in those kind of myths, the dragon gets slayed. But in this story, the Buddha doesn't destroy or try and slay the Naga. He just goes into the fire chamber. He turns, and rather than running away from the scary experience, he just faces it. He turns and faces it. And that really, as a Buddhist, is the first step. The first step is when we kind of turn towards those experiences, whatever arises in meditation, particularly in meditation, but also in our life. We turn towards it courageously. And interestingly, what happens is it becomes less scary, less frightening. When we turn towards what we fear, it's less scary, it's less frightening than we thought it was. And what this reminds me of is when I was a child and had my own room for the first time, I'd sometimes wake up in the night and there would be shadows on the wall, and my first thought was, it's a monster. It's a monster in the room, and I'd be very, very frightened, and sometimes cry out, shout out. But then as my eyes became more accustomed to the shadows, I could see, actually, it's just a coat hanger with my dressing gown on, and it's not a monster. So in the same way, we can start to notice things about ourselves, and they seem very frightening and scary, but actually, as we just bring more awareness to it, think, it's just a habit. It's just something that I've got into the habit of doing, which I can change. I can change that. So as Buddhists, as we turn towards and really take a look at these parts of ourselves, they become less scary, less frightening. And that's what the Buddha does. The Buddha enters the fire chamber and he sits down and he establishes mindfulness. So he starts to do the mindfulness of breathing meditation. When we do an evening where we talk about working with the hindrances to meditation and working with some emotions in meditation. And one of the things we describe in mindfulness, one of the practices we can do, is to name what's there, and that's very, very powerful. It said if we name what arises in meditation or what's in our mind, it no longer has power. It no longer has control over us. It's as though in that situation we've got perspective. We've stepped back, and we're in the gap. that's all right. Might be the Buddha. So in those situations, so in meditation, if something arises and we just name it, we say, this is anger, this is ill will, this is fear, this is grief, this is sadness, this is, whatever it is that we're frightened of experiencing it, just kind of being aware this is what it is, just naming it, giving it a name, takes the sting out of it, takes the power out of it. So that's the first thing we can try and do in meditation with mindfulness, is just name, just label what's there. And it goes hand in hand with another approach we talk about, which is sky-like mind, where we just have this sense of a spacious mind, a spacious experience. So things can arise and there's space for them to be there. There's enough space for the Naga and for us. There's enough space for whatever's there. But if we're in the habit of avoiding emotions or kind of being cut off or alienating ourselves from our emotions, then what I did when I started to meditate was I thought, great, I can name the hindrance and then I don't have to experience it. So that was my approach to meditation was. Great, that's a difficult emotion, I can kind of bash it on the head. And do you know those fairground games that you have where something pops up and then you bash it on the head, and then something else pops up and you bash it on the head? And that's how I used to work in meditation. So a difficult emotion, bash, I won't experience that. Or there's a difficult emotion, bash, I won't experience that. So we have to be careful that we don't bring the same kind of habit of keeping out of the fire chamber, keeping out of contact with those emotions, into this practice of just sitting with and naming what's there. So it doesn't mean we don't feel what's there, we still feel the emotions as they arise and as they pass. But we just give them a name, and giving them a name and turning towards them, examining them, becoming curious about them. It puts us in a different relationship to them. We're now looking at them, we're observing them, we're not overwhelmed by them. So that's the first thing the Buddha does. The Buddha establishes mindfulness and sits with the Naga, sits with what's there, is the fiery emotion. But our mind can be very cunning, and our emotions can be quite deceptive, they can be quite cunning. So if our mind doesn't want to experience strong emotion, defense mechanisms can arise. And the first thing the Naga does in response is cloud the fire chamber with smoke, just completely fills the fire chamber with smoke. And if I don't want to experience strong emotion, what my mind will do is just get carried away with stories. My head will start to kind of become filled with a kind of smoky fog of stories, and then that's very convenient because I'm not in touch with the emotions, I'm not really feeling the emotions. So and also the stories can feed if there's an unskillful nature to the emotions, it can feed that. So if it's anger, say anger's arisen, rather than really kind of just sitting and exploring the anger, I might just get carried away, if I'm not careful, get carried away with the story of, why did they do that? That was really mean of them. Why did they do that? They didn't have to do that. I could think of lots of examples of stories I might get carried away with, kind of justifying the anger. And the smoke can be quite pervasive. Kind of our mind gets filled with this kind of smoky fog. And there's a Buddhist word for that, which is prapancha. Prapancha is the word we give to kind of the stories that we get carried away with, and that take us away from our direct experience, from what's actually happening. Those stories often have a kind of an unskillful motive behind them. It's wanting to perpetuate, to kind of feed our anger, to feed whatever is going on, whatever experience is going on, rather than to tackle it. And what the Buddha does, for me, is puts out a purifying smoke. So what the Buddha will do is kind of have a purer motive of wanting to transform, wanting to sit with and transform what's there. What needs to happen is restoring a kind of clarity of thought, a clarity of mind. So that's an aspect of mindfulness. It's a way that's what is evoked for me by the Buddha, kind of countering this kind of smoke with his own smoke. So that's the stage of mindfulness. And the main thing for me, if I want to unhook from the stories, unhook from this kind of smoky, foggy stories that can kind of cloud the mind and fill the mind in meditation, for me the best way to do that is mindfulness of the body, to kind of really ground myself in the body. So we start off every meditation with a body scan, And yeah, often we can forget about the body after that. Sometimes I do. Okay, it's all about the breath, or whatever the breath is, this kind of idea of the breath. But actually, the breath takes place in the body. The breath's always happening in the body. And in the metta bhavana, the emotions take place in the body. We can feel the emotions in our body. So meditation is a physical exercise. It's not a mental exercise. It's a physical exercise. And the way, in a way, to avoid getting caught up in the stories and getting lost in the stories is to become grounded in the body. And really to cultivate a real present experience of what's happening right now in your body, and to stay with that, become really kind of stay with that. And what we can do is rather than engaging with anger or whatever emotion it is through the stories, we can really feel it. Just feel, what does it feel like to have this experience in my body of being angry? And if we do that, it's as though we are. That's the beginning of starting to transform it. It's like we're freeing the emotion that's been blocked up. If we can just experience it, just really experience it, give our attention to it, just allow it to be there in our body, not as a story, not kind of fueling it, not feeding it, but just feeling it as what we call sensational Vedana, just allowing it to be there. So that's what I do. Is mindfulness of the body is a way of tackling the smoke that the Naga might produce. But if we do that, if we stay with our experience, particularly in the body, and just experience the emotion that's there, then it can get hot. Actually, that's when the emotion can get very, very fiery and hot. And the next thing that happens is the Naga produces flames, the flames. And for me, this is a stage of in meditation, just really feeling very, very strongly what's there. Whatever emotion is there, just really feeling it very, very strongly. If we've kind of unattached from the stories and we're just feeling it in the body, well then we experience the flames of the emotion, the flames of the Naga. And the Buddha has a response to that as well. The Buddha has a response to those flames. And the Buddha produces his own flames, but not to harm the Naga, not to kind of destroy the Naga. So what are these flames that the Buddha produces? Well, for me what this evokes is responding to whatever's there in our hearts or our experience with kindness, with compassion. So the flames that the Buddha produces in the fire chamber, the flames that transform emotion, that transform our experience, are compassion, flames of compassion and metta and kindness. So that's if we're trying to tame wilder aspects of ourselves, or tame demons or nagas, if you like, then what we need to do is to, as well as mindfulness, we need metta and compassion. And there's a couple of stories that illustrate that for me. And it can be helpful. We talk about, we use the example of a wild animal, a horse, on the beginner's course or the follow-on course. We talk about how there can be wilder aspects of ourselves, more animal aspects of ourselves, and it can help to relate to them being like wild animals. It's almost like there's a wild animal bit of us that doesn't do what we want it to do, that we can't tame very easily. And I know Maitradasa is, he's engaging with this aspect of himself through contact with wild animals, through wild horses, and that can be something you can kind of imaginatively do to engage with wilder bits of ourselves. But there's a story that a friend of mine told me. He's a guy from Venezuela, and he said that his grandfather tamed wild horses in Venezuela. And the way that he did it wasn't through using a rope or through fear or aggression towards the horses. He simply used kindness. He was very, very kind to the horses at all times. And what happened is, over time, that the horses began to trust him, to befriend him. And it wasn't they stayed wild. They didn't become domesticated. They stayed wild, but they would always return to, and they always trusted his grandfather. So he used kindness to befriend and win the trust of these wild animals, wild beasts. I've got a kind of less wild or less adventurous example of my own, which is I've got two cats, and one of them, we rescued these cats from the shelter in Broome Hall, the Cats Rescue Shelter. And basically they were both quite feral cats. And one of them, they're both quite feral cats, but one of them was quite friendly, and the other one was very unfriendly, very kind of violent, very aggressive, and very frightened. And they said at the rescue centre, well, they're brother and sister, and they have to come together. You can't just take the friendly one. And it was just quite archetypal, kind of quite mythic for me. You know, if you want the friendly, nice bit, you've got to have the aggressive wild cat as well. Yeah, I wasn't going to plan to talk about this, but also I had a dream when I was about to be ordained that I was back at home. I was in the mountains in Spain, but I had a dream that I was back at home and I kept trying to close my front door, and there kept being this wild cat, black cat kept coming into the door, and every time I kept picking it up, putting it outside and closing the door, and when I turned around it managed to get back inside again. And it's almost like there's a part of me that I didn't want to be there at the ordination, which kept sneaking in through the door and was telling me I'm going to be there as well. So I can relate to, basically there's one cat, we called her Missy cat, and she was very, very aggressive. When we first went into the room, she just hissed and lashed out with her claws, and they said, well, she'll never become tame, she'll never let you stroke her, but basically they come together. So we took them home, and to begin with, they both just kind of hid underneath the cupboard for quite a long time, quite a few days, and then after a while the Missy cat would come out and just have some food and then dart back under the cupboard again. And basically, if any time you kind of made any kind of movement at all, even towards her, she would just bolt out of the room or try and hide. And Lucy, my wife, she's still got scars across her arm from where she got lacerated by the cat trying to take her to the vets. So basically there was this very, very aggressive, kind of dangerous cat which we're trying to feed and look after. And I kind of instinctively had the sense of how to try to work with the cat. I had the sense of, well, this cat's frightened, basically. This cat's very, very frightened of me and of us. And what I need to do is basically just sit in the same room as this cat and not try and move towards it, not try and do anything, just sit in the same room as the cat. I did this for quite a long time, actually, a few hours, a series of evenings. And one evening the cat came out and I sat very, very still and just kind of sniffed around me, and then went back under the cupboard again, and then came around and sniffed at me again and went back under the cupboard. So basically over time the cat, through doing this, just not trying to befriend the cat, not trying to do anything, just sitting alongside the cat, started to trust me, started to kind of come out a bit longer. And after about a year, the cat let me stroke her for the first time while she was having some food. And then basically after a couple of years, she was my best friend. The cat is kind of still my, I'm her best friend. I don't know if I could say she's my best friend, but I'm her best friend. Basically she would then spend the whole night sleeping on top of my legs in the bed and follow me around. If I got up to go to the loo in the night, she'd follow me, open the door, close the door again. And so she completely transformed and now completely trusts me. And I think one of the reasons I instinctively knew how to do that is because there was a bit of me which I could relate to as being the same as Missy Cat. There's a bit of me which was kind of, I'd basically been mistreated and was quite scared and quite frightened, and was expressing itself in meditation as being quite aggressive, quite malevolent, almost quite nasty, and I was a bit scared of. But what I kind of realised I had to do in meditation as well was just sit with this experience, just sit with these different parts of me that would arise in meditation and just allow them to be there, not try and change them, not try and kind of push them away, not try and move towards them, just sit and experience them, just feel what was there, and just be with these bits of myself. And I could, I've talked about this in different occasions and given kind of more examples, so I'm not going to do that this evening, but just to kind of, just to say, basically that's how, one way of working. You can imagine just being very, very kind to a wild bit of yourself in meditation. You could bring to mind, well, there might be a wild animal part of me. If you experience kind of very strong emotion like anger or rage or jealousy or whatever it is that you're frightened of, just, if it comes up in meditation, you think, okay, well, this is a bit of me that's a bit wild, and I need to be kind to it. I need to be compassionate to this part of me, and just feel it, just kind of experience it, just be with it. So the Buddha produces these flames to counter the flames of the Naga, and for me these are flames of compassion and kindness that will transform. They're the real flames that transform what's there, that transform the emotion. I just want to say a little bit about, I've talked a lot about working in meditation, but I also want to talk a little bit about, well, how do we work with strong emotion and transform it outside of meditation? And a couple of things to say which are kind of related to inside meditation. But the first thing is that if, for me what I was working with, particularly for a number of years, was anger. I was working with the experience of anger, which for maybe 27 years of my life, I thought I never experienced. I thought I've never experienced anger. I don't experience anger. I'm not an angry person. And then after maybe 2 or 3 years of meditating, I realised actually I'm angry most of the time. And I've always just kind of blocked off that experience. I've never really allowed myself to feel that or to experience that. So I started to realise, and you hear very, very, very common for people on beginners courses to say, I can't think of anybody to put in the 4th stage because there's nobody that I don't like. And then maybe a few months later, they've got people queuing out along the block of people that they don't like. And it's not that they've suddenly liked people a lot less, it's that they're just more aware of their response to people. So, so for maybe 27 years I thought, I'm not an angry person, I don't get angry. But then what started to happen is I started to experience anger, particularly in meditation, and then I didn't know what to do with it really. And I realised after a while what I needed to do was just allow myself to feel the anger that was already there. In a sense, if I already was angry, I'd spent so many years blocking that experience. I just had to start feeling what was there, just really being with what was there. And in a sense, to do that, you need to have two supportive conditions. You need to have very supportive housemates or partners, people around you. If you're going to kind of allow yourself to experience anger, then you need people who are on board with what you're doing. And my wife Lucy was very supportive of that. Sometimes I just have to say, well, I'm really in a really bad mood. I'm feeling really angry, and it's nothing to do with you, but I can't really do too much about it. I just need a bit of space, and so I just need to kind of take myself off, or just have a bit of space and just kind of wait for it to pass, wait for it to go. And then the other thing you need to do to experience emotion outside of meditation is to have spaces in your day and your routine. If you're very, very busy all the time, keeping yourself very, very busy, well, that's another way of staying out of the fire chamber. It's a way of kind of not allowing ourselves to experience what's there. So you need to create some gaps, some spaces in your day. Just have a bit of time where you do some gardening, you sit with a cup of tea. Maybe, for me, the best place to experience emotions, even including meditation, is under the duvet, actually. If I'm lying in bed under the duvet, particularly on a solitary retreat, then it seems all my emotions are available. I can experience whatever's there. It's almost like a safe place. It's like being under the duvet. I can just feel whatever's there safely. Even more so than in meditation, funnily enough. It seems quite an odd thing, or with sitting with a cup of tea. But basically, if you want to kind of become more in touch with your emotions and in a better relationship with your emotions, then you need to have gaps and spaces in your day where you just sit and feel how you are, sit and feel what's there. And then, thirdly, if you're going to do that, you need to have a very strong practice of ethics. If you're going to kind of be with emotions like anger or other potentially destructive emotions, then you need to have a very strong protective kind of boundary of ethics and a strong ethical practice, because otherwise you're going to end up harming other people. It's going to spill out, it's going to cause damage to your relationship. So you need to really have kind of a strong ethical practice of not harming people, being kind to people, being friendly to people, strong practice of metta as well. So the ethics, for me, the 5 precepts are like a kind of protective, they create a kind of protective space for your Naga to play, for your demon to play. And it's like, if you've really got a good practice of ethics, then it's going to be safer for you to kind of just be with whatever is there, and people aren't going to get harmed. And for me, that's evoked by the image of the community of people crowded around the fire chamber, but the flames stay contained in the fire chamber. The flames don't spill out and harm people. So basically, there's a symbol of where you can learn to contain emotions so that they don't spill out. So you're not blocking them, you're not pushing them away. You're really feeling what's there and with what's there, but at the same time, it's not kind of spilling out and harming people. So you can contain the experience. So for me, that's what's evoked by the fire chamber, the Buddha, all these flames, but they don't kind of spill out and harm people. People don't get burnt by them. So For me, I really, really like this sutta. I love the. Well, for me, I came along to Buddhism not in touch with my emotions and not really sure what to do about it. And I came across this sutta and lots of stuff about Nagas and dragons and how the Buddhist tradition doesn't slay the Nagas and the demons. The Buddhist tradition gets them working for the Dharma, gets them working. The Buddha, in lots of suttas like the Buddha and other figures, they are helped by the Nagas and the demons. So it's a very strong mythology that, in a sense, we need our emotions, we need our emotional energy. We need to be kind of wholehearted and really engage with what we're doing, what we're about on the Buddhist path. So if we're cutting bits of ourselves off, if we're blocking parts of our experience, we can't be wholehearted. We can't be really wholeheartedly behind what we're doing. And bits of ourselves will get left out, bits of ourselves won't be transformed. We need to have all of ourselves engaged and present on the Buddhist path so it can be transformed. And then the fruit of that, well, what is the fruit of that if we're able to do that? Well, that's evoked by the Buddha. At the end of the story, the Buddha steps out at the end of the night with the fire chamber, with the Naga curled up inside the bowl. And so, the Buddha symbolises a human being, a human being who has complete control over his emotional experience, his kind of all that emotional energy, all that power of his emotions are completely at his service, at his fingertips really. So that's the symbolizer of this kind of Naga, this very powerful serpent, completely at his command, completely at his service. And that's possible, it's possible for human beings to become completely in control of the whole range of experiences of emotion, the whole range of emotion. And that means all that emotional energy is harnessed, it's all available. So, and it becomes transformed, what once would have been hatred or anger is transformed into compassion. And a very, very strong, very, very powerful, heartfelt compassion. Very, very heartfelt, unlimited experience of love. So if all of that emotional energy is available, it can become transformed into very, very powerful, very, very potent love, compassion. Energy to pursue good. And there's an end to the story, there's a happy ending to the story because there's a bit more involved. Kassapa eventually becomes a disciple of the Buddha. Kassapa becomes a disciple of the Buddha. And the community of disciples, the smelly, dreadlocked fire worshippers, they're so impressed by the Buddha, they're so impressed by his ability to go, his fearlessness, his courage to go into the fire chamber and befriend, train, almost tame this Naga. They're so impressed by that they also become disciples of the Buddha. So there's 500 in this first camp, and they all become disciples of the Buddha. And as a symbol of this, it said that they cut off their dreadlocks, maybe have a wash, I don't know. They cut off their dreadlocks anyway. They put them in the river, and the dreadlocks sail down the river. And the people in the second and third camp see these dreadlocks floating down. What's going on? So they come to see the other group and hear about what's happened, and they become followers of the Buddha. So all of a sudden now there's 1,200, 1,200 more followers of the Buddha. So he's gone from having 64 followers to now having 1,200 followers. Basically it's an example of, by transforming yourself, Kassapa. For me, what's this episode in the fire chamber is the Buddha helping Kassapa to face his Naga, to kind of transform his Naga. And through doing that, through transforming ourselves, we can have a real impact on the world, actually. We can have a real presence, a real impact. Somebody who's got all their emotional energy available has a real presence, a real impact about them. People really are affected, really moved, really impressed by them. And that's what the Buddha was like as a person, and that's what Kassapa, for me, a transformed Kassapa was like. His followers were really impressed. So basically, that is the fruit. If we really can engage with our emotions, the whole range of our emotions, and don't block them off, don't be frightened of them, but engage with them with mindfulness and with metta and compassion, just sitting with them, experiencing them in meditation and out of meditation, but with the boundary, the ring fence of ethical practice. Then what can happen is we become radically different, we become transformed, we can become wholehearted, passionate people with unlimited energy, unlimited love, unlimited compassion. And yeah, that kind of person transforming themselves will have a huge impact on the world. So yeah, the Buddha had a huge impact on the world, and still has a huge impact on the world. You know, I've been just reflecting about this sutta, really inspired by the example of the Buddha. One of the things I forgot to say earlier on was just the image of the Buddha. The Buddha post-enlightenment, kind of quite a scruffy-looking man, aged about 36, mid-30s, just a scruffy-looking man, quite emaciated because he spent a number of years starving himself before he rejected that, and then pursued a different approach. So he would have been quite scruffy-looking, emaciated, but handsome. We're told he looked handsome as well by this sutta, and quite an impressive character, just to kind of walk around barefooted and just share his experience with people. So that's been really inspiring me this past few days, just bringing that image to mind. And we're still experiencing the effect of his transformation today. So basically, just to round off and summarise, if we can enter the fire chamber and not be frightened and just experience what's there, then we can be over time, with effort and kindness and mindfulness, we can become radically different. We can transform ourselves, and through that we can have a big impact to transform the world.